my burning question. My burning question is, so why did white women in this country vote against democracy in the last election?
That is such a good question. And I would say that the answer is that what they decided was in their best interest was maybe not exactly what was in their best interest. The whole point of my book is that we can create ideas, right?
Yeah.
We are the only creature who can create ideas. Every other creature, they follow their DNA instructions and maybe have their instinct, and some can think to some extent, but not like humans, right? We can think and we can choose. And choose is our superpower. And the problem is we're born with no ideas. And so whatever ideas we get have to be from people who put them in us. And what happens is we can, unlike nature, who only can have good things come their way, because if they have bad stuff come their way, they die, right? Okay, like a cell, if it comes upon some poisonous material and eats it, it dies. We can come along with a bad idea and live with that just fine for years and years and years. So because we don't have the brakes that nature puts on us, that's our evolutionary movement. That's what we've done when we've created ideas. And people can believe ideas that are bad for them. And I think what you're seeing is a people who have listened to ideas that either aren't true or are bad for them, but they have been convinced that those are ideas that are good for them. And they are voting in their best interest. It's just that what we look at it and go, that doesn't look like your physical or mental or any other best interest for you. But in their mind, it's their best interest. And I think it's very important to understand that people have all kinds of ideas, and a lot of them are, especially in this country now, are based on things that aren't true. And they believe those things, and that becomes their value and what's important to them.
I love that. I can't wait. I can't wait for this conversation to
Okay,
hear
good.
about how that all unpacks. I do executive coaching and change agent in organizations. And what I
Wonderful.
always do is get down to our beliefs, fuel our feelings, which fuel
Right.
our actions. And
Yes,
so,
I am in total agreement with you. And where I'm coming from is that if you want to understand humans, you have to understand the life that came before us and understand how humans are different, which is this ability to think and choose, and then look at how we can apply nature's solutions, given that we're humans and we can think and choose. That's what the book is about. Both books are about it. The Dina is just a fictionalized version of the same. It's a Socratic dialogue between two characters, and it has a little story with it. The human idea is just the theory, straight up. So it just depends on which way you want to read the theory. But the very idea that we get to choose how we sort ourselves out. You talked about values. See, life, they don't have to think about what their values are. They don't have to think about what their actions are. They're all encapsulated in their DNA and their instructions, right? They are born as members of the ecosystem. They have all their instructions. They just start living. And that's what they do. And we are born that same physical way, right? We have all of our DNA instructions to keep our body going, but we have no ideas to live in the what I call the idea sphere, in the realm of human ideas. We have to learn them. We have to learn language in order to communicate even. And so we're stuck two steps down from animals. We must determine our values. We must determine our goals. Animals don't have to. They know one goal: survive. That's all they do. They're instructed to survive, and they will survive. We get to decide what goals we have in living with our ideas. And what I think we don't do a lot, and probably why you are in the industry you are in, is that we don't teach young people that they're supposed to determine their goals so that they can live. Because you can't be happy unless you have a goal and then you're working to achieve that goal, and that goal is important to you. What we do with our children a lot of times is we tell them what our goals are. right? And say, hey, child, you get to have my goals. And then the child's like, but I don't like that goal. And now I'm confused. I don't know what to do. And we have a lot of dissonance in our people because instead we should be teaching them, hey, we're going to give you all this information for which to discover yourself. And you get to live in this world as you, but you have the job of figuring out your own goals, your own values, and then determining the actions that go with them. But that's not what we do. And that's why I think there's a lot of unhappiness and disconnection in our society today.
So the nature nurture connection, are you, what about the generational DNA? What about the mammal side of us that comes with with the survival package?
Right. It's all there. I mean, obviously, nothing comes from nothing, right? We are, we are the product of billions and billions of years of winners in the DNA world, right? We are winners. I mean, I don't think we should call anybody a loser, right? Because we're all here because somebody before us survived and somebody before that survived all the way down to the first cell that ever lived. We're born with all of it, all of our DNA, all of our things. And I can tell that I get from my long line of genetics that I have maybe a good brain, but also a lot of anxiety and prone to alcoholism and a bunch of other things that I am prone to. But one of the things that we are missing is that we have to provide the information, the ideas for a person to be able to sort through all that stuff. If I grow up and I have no interaction with anybody, I will be a vegetable. I will not be able to focus. I will not be able to function on Earth. I mean, because we have all agreed that we are social beings and we're going to communicate together. So when I grow up, my parents taught me about religion and they taught me to be, this way. And I had 11 brothers and sisters, 10 of which are older. So they taught me all kinds of things that maybe my parents didn't want me to know. What happened then is because some of those things were really great that I learned, and some of them were really not good fit for me. My job was to sort it out. But first of all, I had to figure out that it was my job to sort it out because they didn't bother to tell me, hey, you should sort this out. So, it's just kind of we make it a crapshoot because we don't really have a good picture of how humanity fits in the world. So nature and nurture are both important, but the nurture, and not just the caring for a child, but the ideas we put in people's heads are exceedingly important for that person to grow up to be a full member of the idea-sphere, what I call the human ecosystem.
And I call it critical thinking, which I had to be in college to learn how to do critical thinking. And the bad good news of that was I was a late in life student. So I was
Right.
in my 40s before I learned how to think for
Mhm.
myself.
And I was in my 40s too before I dealt with all the stuff that was in my way.
Mm.
And I think there's something to that where I think what happens is when we're not taught these ideas that it's okay to disagree, it's okay to come up with your own ideas, it's okay to search. What we do is we go around with all the ideas we've learned and we fight and we fight and we fight until I got to my 40s, I couldn't fight anymore. I couldn't fight anymore. And so I was like, I give up. And then I went to, start getting help. And it was like, oh, this is the way I can do this. And it gave me a completely new lease on life.
And what do you think about people who are late in life diagnosed now with neurodivergency or ADHD or autism when we were coming through and we just thought we were extra special brilliant?
Yeah. Or as my mom used to say, oh, honey, you're just tightly strung. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think what's happened is we have a habit in humanity of seeking answers before we know the questions. Let me put it that way. So, for instance, when humans first evolved, right? We have these big brains and we could think and we learned to communicate. And, shortly, within 10,000, 12,000 years ago, we started asking, why are we here? What's the role? What are we doing? And so we answered that question with things like religion and philosophy and and a bunch of and science. I mean, the Greeks were good. They figured a bunch of stuff out that, then we forgot during the Dark Ages. But we did all these things, and the problem is we don't really know how humans worked at the time. We didn't know how animals worked at the time. So by the time we learned about DNA, which is very important in my book, because if you want to understand humans, you have to understand that we're made of 35 trillion cells, all of which have DNA that process information. And that's the key where you have to start understanding humans. And you have to understand how that is different from the ideas that we create. And yet they're parallel in structure. We go along, and by the time we get to DNA, and I came out and said, oh, well, you know what? How life works and how human ideas work are really parallel in structure. We can look at these as just different layers of but the same actions. But it's been 10,000 years since we've had religion, and it is dug in. And my argument is that religion is just an idea that people made with the best information they had at the time. But we have better information now, and we don't have to rely on information to answer the questions about what's humanity like. But good luck, Anne. You got 12,000 years of dug in ideas that you're going to try and, put out there. But I'm like, I might as well. It feels like it's a logical answer. And it's not that religion isn't important, but religion answers some questions, but not others, and I know that people really believe in religion, and it's okay. I don't particularly, because I'm more on the rational side of things, but it doesn't mean that I can't see where people benefit from religion.
When you've got 10 or 12,000 years of a belief system encoded into those
Uh-huh.
35 million cells, it
Right, right.
explains to me why I see my experiential learning is that
Uh-huh.
we are wired for some kind of faith. We're going to believe in something, some higher
Right.
something. It's going to be UFOs, or it's
Yeah.
going to be a higher power, or it's going to be, but it's going to be something because we're wired, which doesn't mean we can't be rewired, but there's a
Right.
deconstruction that
Uh-huh.
which we are seeing.
Hmm.
Any faith is not better than no faith. Toxic
Right.
faith will kill you and everybody
Yeah.
you love.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would argue that throughout the history of religion, most of it is toxic. um, where it allows, I think, where the religion allows you personally to feel better about life or yourself, fine. But when you start saying other people have to believe what I believe, and I get to kill them as a result, or I get to judge them as a result, that's not it. Because what I do is I say, if you want to believe in something, believe in how the cell works. Because what the cell works and how your body works, your 35 trillion cells all work together to keep you alive and to keep each cell alive. That is democracy without voting, right? That's democracy. What do we do with democracy? But it's the common good. That's the link. The difference is humans have to choose it. Animals don't choose it. It's evolved that way because it works. How do we create systems that we choose that maximize human choice but minimize the harm to each other? Because that's exactly how your body works, and every single body works in this uh, earth we live on.
So let's talk about the human ecosystem and the natural ecosystem in
Mhm.
terms of competition versus collaboration, because it
Ah,
gets framed in today's political structure as, a republic or democracy versus socialism or
right,
some other
right,
label that we want to put on it so we can
right.
be better than.
It's a very good question. So, first of all, competition and collaboration. And there's a third one that's a branch of collaboration called coordination, which I'd also like to talk about.
Yeah.
So, competition in the natural world, let's just quickly go through it. Competition is the default strategy to survive, right? You got to eat to live. That's the first thing living beings have to do. So, and competition in nature is for resources, not against one another. It's for resources. So the guys who are best at getting the resources, the little entities that are the best at getting resources, survive. And the ones who don't die.
Mhm.
And any new generation that has a slight difference in variation of how they work, if that variation allows them to get resources better, they live. If they don't, they die. Okay, so over time, you get a whole bunch of different creatures. and they've competed. But what happened over time is that we started with single cells. At some point along the line, the single cells said, you know, well, they didn't think, but they somehow joined together and they were able to be more efficient. They joined together to split the functions that to survive and to maybe become more efficient at gaining resources and then spreading them out. So multicellular beings, which is what we are, we have 35 trillion of them, evolved because they were more efficient and survived better. So today there are, you know, far more single-celled animals, you know, single-celled organisms on Earth than multicelled organisms. But there are far more cells in the multicellular bodies than there are of the single organisms, like 80% to 20%. Most of our cells work together. In other words, most of our cells on Earth collaborate together. They work together to achieve a goal, which is for your body to survive and for the tiger or whatever else animal or plant is out there to survive. So collaboration is far more common than competition. But when humans came along, they could only see the competition. But all you have to do is look at your finger and realize that there's a whole bunch of collaboration right under the surface that they don't see. And so when Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, which was brilliant, by the way, he didn't know about cells. He didn't know about DNA. He didn't know how they collaborated together. All he could see was the surface, and it was brilliant. That's part of the evolutionary movement of ideas. He created the process, the concept of evolution, and how things change over time. That's great. Now what comes along is we are a different creature, and we can collaborate. And because in order for cells to collaborate, they need to communicate. And we are social beings. We can all communicate. So we are not required to compete. We can collaborate just as easily as we can compete. Competition helps with diversity, it helps with efficiency, it helps with innovation, right? Those animals that if you're only the ones who survive get the resources, you're going to get more innovative, more efficient creatures over time. Collaboration, on the other hand, can create complexity, can create specialization, can create, look at the complex humans we are compared to a single cell organism. That's due to our collaboration and our ability to organize. The other thing about collaboration that's important is that there has to be a mechanism for your 35 trillion cells to work together. There has to be. Something has to keep you all in line, right? And that is the coordination system. In our bodies, it's our brain and our neural system. In our societies, it's government. Government is the coordinating mechanism. And if you look at what would be a successful government, which compared to what would be a successful body, a successful government is one that allows people to maximize their choice, but minimize their harm. That would be the overriding goal, because that's how a animal survives, is they have to do both of those things. They have to let every cell do its job, but no cell can hurt each other. And in the meantime, when you're talking about things like socialism and capitalism, a body is a very socialistic concept in some way to think about it. Even though it's working for the common good, if you look at how nourishment goes, a body, you consume food, your stomach grinds it all up, and then it sends all of it out to every cell in your body to be nourished. That's not how we work in our society. In our capitalist society, everybody works on their own, and those who make it and get what money they can, they survive, they figure out how to survive. The problem is, over time, the people who get the resources, because we're humans and we can choose, they can accumulate more and more resources. And what do they do with those resources? They stop other people from being able to compete. They buy off the government so that they can get rules and laws that benefit them and not benefit other people. They pay people as low a wage as possible, so they have to go get, aid from the government. These are things that people can do that animals would never do, cells would never do. If you say, okay, kidneys, you're being so lazy. We're not going to give you your food. Your body dies. It doesn't work. But we do it all the time. And so the idea is to get a better idea. Um, as part of the coordinating mechanism, the government ought to do everything they can to maximize the ability of children, particularly, to become full citizens in the human ecosystem. Healthcare, housing, safety, education, food. These are things that some people right now get it really well. They have wealthier parents, or they have it, so they get enough. But some people are in desperate situations. How can you expect somebody to learn and have great ideas if they haven't had breakfast? You know, if they don't have a safe place to live, if they don't have heat in their house on a winter day. These are things that the government, if you want to be as successful as a body, the government should be considering. And it's not because you're being a nanny state. It's because you want everybody to grow so well that they can contribute in the future and be part of it, so that we don't have to send those resources that way anymore.
Under about the age of 8, children are just taking in all of these experiences, and everything they're taught is the gospel, and mom or dad or caregiver is
Hmm.
their representative of God for later on.
Right.
Their brains don't begin to sort those things out into choices. And yet I go back to 18-month-olds or 2-year-olds and the terrible twos and the
Hmm.
no word. And the fact is, they do differentiate early. They're simply squelched.
My opinion, I have two grandchildren, ages 3 and 6. So I've seen those ideas come out. I just have a funny example. A young kid came to the swimming pool and she had a mermaid outfit on. So I took a picture of her, and then I showed the kids this picture, a photograph of a mermaid. And they know about mermaids because they watch Disney. And it's like, okay. And they looked at the picture and they said, "Is that real?" And I said, "Well, it looks real." And then they said, "Have you shown this to my dad?" Because because the
Yes.
dad was for them the arbiter of truth,
Yes.
so they could already discern there was something off about this that they needed to go find out about. So I think, and I myself can remember things from when I was 4. It's like, oh, I was putting thoughts in my head. So, I can't say about every kid, but my assumption is to assume that they are obtaining ideas at all times, and they are evaluating them, even though they can't communicate that. It takes a long time for kids to be able to learn the languages that we agree how we're going to communicate. But that doesn't mean that brains aren't working. It just means that maybe by 8 is when they can start to communicate it more clearly.
So I have a few more grandchildren than you that span about 20 years because we're an
Yeah.
active family. And one of the things that every grandchild that I have had in 20 years has been involved in is a game called Minecraft. And
Oh,
you
okay.
familiar with that?
I'm not.
Okay, in the beginning stages, it's all about creating resources, minimizing risk, having to gather resources, and the most disturbing things for them is when their sibling comes in with a conquering mindset and
Mhm.
destroys their stockpile or the
Right.
beauty they're building in their little world.
Right.
I wonder with these games how that may change o- how we make these decisions.
Well, I think it's even more fundamental than that. I think the whole idea of social media is another factor that makes the newest generation. Um, I think you talked about critical thinking. I don't think we're giving them the information they need. I think we've kind of dumbed ourselves into school is for teaching a child how to become an employee somewhere, you know, and we are missing the whole concept of education. And I'm not saying that parents don't have, obviously, they're going to be educating their child every day from the minute they're born. But I think our concept of education should be widened dramatically to think about things. And like I said, I think where we start is look, you get to do what you want, but you can't harm others. And that is the fundamental mindset of democracy. I think if you look at our Constitution, in the preamble, they say, provide for the general welfare, ensure domestic tranquility. They're saying, do what you want, but don't harm each other, about as clearly as you can say it. But they didn't have the clarity of of nature to see it, because they didn't know about cells in 1700s. They didn't. They knew, they had the philosophy of thinking of democracy, which was, John Locke and all those guys, which was wonderful, but it wasn't as clear as when you look at an animal and you go, look, you just can't do that. And so what you do is you teach children, what is harm, what is choice, where is the line, what does this mean? And for a government, when we make laws, the laws should be minimize harm and maximize choice. So if you have a person who is doing something that doesn't harm another person, that should be allowed. So when you talk about gay marriage, it's like, that doesn't hurt anybody. Go for it. And this is where the concept of racism is so insidious, because there's absolutely no harm in being any color. And yet we have created an environment in which there is so much damage being done, because it's so easy to see a person of a different color, or and to judge them. And we've got hundreds of years of culture where we've done harm to people for something that doesn't matter. And the cells don't care if you're, a funny shape or whatever, as long as you're doing, pumping that blood on the heart, or flushing out the waste on the kidney. I don't care. They don't care. It doesn't matter. So, but we care all the time. So our laws need to reflect that sense. So where something doesn't matter, let it go. But when harm can happen, regulation is required. So when you talk about guns that can potentially kill somebody, to maim them and harm their life, they need to be regulated. End of story. We have to figure out a way so that they minimize the harm. You put gun locks on, you require gun insurance, you do all of these things that say, no, 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 no. We know you want to have a gun, but there are things we have to do, because we don't mind gun ownership. We mind shootings of children. We mind shootings at music venues. So we have to figure out where that line is. And that's how governments should be run. They should be run to maximize the choice and minimize the harm. And regulations aren't bad. We are in an interdependent society where one person can affect the other. You can't harm that other person. And if we need a law to do it, we'll make a law to do it.
This is so basic and so brilliant, all at the same time. How do we, A, switch gears personally, and B,
Mhm.
switch gears collectively using
Such a
your
good question.
idea?
Well, it's such a good question. So what I know personally, it makes my life happier to live this way. I can analyze a situation and I can say, like somebody's coming up and like, yeah, 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 chawing at something. And I can be like, you know what? They're not harming anybody. I don't have to worry about that. Or sometimes my behavior is, I step over the line, be like, look, you can't, you can't behave. That person has a right to their choices. You can't, step across the line and harm them, right? I can go out and have a conversation with somebody and I can disagree with them. That's fine. I can't punch them in the nose and they can't punch me in the nose because we disagree. There's the line, somewhere in there. And so living with this awareness, it's much easier to even look at problem solving, like homelessness. It's like, a body with there is no cell in a body that is homeless ever, ever. So
Right.
why do we have homelessness? What if we provided a home and provide an apartment and provided services really nearby where people could come and get their services? In fact, Finland just did this, and they have 80% of the people that they housed are now off on their own doing fine. 20% still need that because they will never function in the world, but we leave this all to chance. But that's what our coordinating system ought to do. If we really care about, saying every person has the right to become a full member of the idiosphere, right? But we don't do that. We say, if you can't function in the world, there's something, you're just bad. You're morally corrupt, or you're inept, or you're this, or you're that, the other thing. So you asked about
What's
personal. So
Yeah.
for me, it's personally easier for me to live my life. It's personally easier to understand problems.
Yeah.
And collectively, it's harder because we have to, John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist said, I have the quote on my wall, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas,
Uh-huh.
but in escaping from old ones.
Mm.
And that's what we need to do is escape from old ones. My book is an attempt for people to try and escape from old ideas and to try on a new one and see how life looks. And what I really would love is for people who are experts in their field to be able to come in and say, oh, let's kind of really understand this case about how nature works and how a society could work. Let's apply that to a problem in my field and see if I can't come up with better solutions than the ones we have now. So I used social media as an example in my book. And what I came up with is if we were cells in a body, the only information we send out in the world is up to the brain to say this is how I'm doing, and then the brain either says you're okay or oh let me help you with a problem you might be having. Like say I cut my finger, they say oh emergency on right index finger, we need to send out our like, little guys just save them, and that's what the brain does. Well, we're humans. We can choose. We can send out all kinds of information. And a lot of it is useless, but we can do that, right? So the question isn't that we can't send out the information, is some of the information, it's all mixed up. Some is harmful and some isn't,
Mhm.
but it's all mixed up together. So how do we determine that? And our thinking is we must regulate the provider to to determine what's harmful and to limit that. Well, it's never going to work. There's too many things. It's just impossible, and they don't want to because they don't make money that way. So that's not going to work. So what I said was, if you're going to regulate the person who's posting and make them tell you whether something is true or not. Make them tell you whether this is your opinion or a fact. And if they do it wrong, let's say somebody says the election is rigged, and then they say, it's true, we can come back and say, nope, all the evidence shows that this is not true. You have to take down that post. And people can argue against it. And if you have enough false posts or enough false arguments against something, you get taken off the thing. You get to say, sorry, you aren't playing right.
Nice. Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're making the responsibility go down to the very lowest level. And the regulation is you must describe your post as truthful and whether you're responsible for it. So
Yeah.
that's another way to approach a problem. We have to tell people what we're posting, whether it's true or false. And if you get election was rigged and oh, it's just my opinion, okay, you can go, meh, it's just an opinion, right?
Mhm.
As opposed to saying, 60 cases ruled against Trump, against the election rig. That's a true statement. You can make that statement and you can say it comes up with a little green true, as opposed to red opinion. You know, it's just an idea, but I can look at problems differently because of this mindset.
Two things. First, do no harm and talk to people instead of about them.
Right, right, right. Because what do people want? They want choice. They want to be heard. They want to understand. That's the human nature. That's our brain working. We are of two ecosystems. We are of the one that is natural,
Mhm.
that says we don't want to be harmed, right? That's survival. And the other one is of our mental, our ideas. We want to be heard. We want to understand. The Hippocratic Oath just takes care of the physical. It doesn't take care of the idea side. And religions often do that. They say, you can't do this behavior. But the nature of humans is to choose. It's like, that's not the way you do it. You know, it's just like, so to me, I can sort these things out so much easier now, because I have this mindset. And that's what I want people to do. I want them to take it, understand it, make it their own, and figure out how to work in the world this way. And I want people to run for office with this idea in mind. I want them to get out and say, look, these are how we're going to write laws. We're not going to write laws for tobacco industry who makes products that kill people. We are going to make laws that say, tobacco industry, figure out your products so that you don't harm people. If you can't, we're putting you out of business. Sorry. That's the difference in how I see the world now.
Our word for 2025 is resilience. This
Mm.
is some brilliant resilience
I
work.
hope so. It gives me hope. I mean, but it's a big ask, to basically go out in the world and say, hey, here's a new idea that kind of throws a lot of stuff you've been thinking on your head. Just try it. But the book is approachable. Both books are approachable. Dina's funny. I mean, I have a lot of bad puns, and but the human idea book is, it uses examples, and it's very approachable, and it is not like a science book, and it's
Mhm.
not like a textbook. It's I'm having a conversation with you in that book, and I just want people to try it and see if it makes a difference in how they view the world. Because I think it's a way to connect to the world. Because when I started worrying about this when I was 10 years old, I learned about evolution in Catholic school. I will give that, to you. And I've been wondering how humans fit ever since. And it took me 50 years to kind of go. I kept taking ideas and throwing them out. And then I'd take some and I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's good. And finally, I read a lot, and I'm standing on a lot of really big shoulders: Darwin, Rothschild, Stephen Jay Gould. These are people that I read about and was like, oh. And then the facts are not new, but the synthesis is a little bit different. And that's what I want people to understand, is that there is a way to look at this world that makes all kinds of sense. You don't need religion, and it maximizes people's desire to choose. So it maximizes their satisfaction with the one rule that, yeah, if you want to maximize your satisfaction, you can't step on somebody else's. You can't step on somebody else's satisfaction. You can't hurt them. They have the right to.
My mom used to say, "You can't build your own happiness on someone else's unhappiness."
Exactly. And my dad used to say, my rights stop at your nose, or something like that. So this was all, I mean, all of these things that, nothing comes from nothing. These were all the ideas that got built into my head to make this, and now it's an idea I want to share with the world, and hope that people can pick it up and say, yeah, I could run for office with this concept. I could run a company with this concept. I could run my book club with this concept. I can live my life with this concept, and I think that this is sort of the prime directive, so to speak, of how you make a better world, because that's how animals have done it. They've been doing it successfully for billions of years. So we just haven't quite listened yet.
Well, and our lived experience, I love that it centers on this ecosystem as
Hmm.
within, so without. I like that.
Hmm.
But the lived experience I have is different than the lived experience of a young Black woman coming up through corporate.
Right,
And
right,
to assume that mine is the cookie cutter model for what everybody should feel, see, sense
right,
is
right.
part of the problem.
Well, and not only that, but that's why choice is so important.
Yeah.
Is we need to maximize our understanding of others, because they're going to be different. They get to have different choices. It's okay. I don't mind if somebody's religious and I'm not. I don't care if somebody's a different color than me. I don't care if you have a different color of hair. I don't care. I don't care if you have kids or don't have kids. I don't care if you're a man or a woman. None of that matters. What matters is that you get to maximize your choices in this world. And our coordinating system should ensure that. That's what it should ensure. And what right now we're very out of balance. So, where we at first, to fix the problem, we need to recalibrate our resources to try and get people to where they can all be maximum members of the idea sphere, to maximize their choices. In order to do that, you have to take care of their physical ecosystem. They have to have food. They have to be safe. They have to have housing. They have to have education. These are things we must do to get people to a place where they can be maximal members of our society, which is this interdependent ecosystem called the idea sphere. And if we don't do that, we're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. So we just best get started.
Yeah. And where can people find you to learn more or to work with you, or do you work with
Well,
people? What do you do?
yeah, well, I'm just retired now, and I've been retired, and I wrote this book. So thehumanidea.com is my website. It's not updated. I've just had a bunch of family emergencies that I've had to deal with, but I will update it. But I have my book. The Human Idea is all over. You can get it at bookstores. The Bank of Books usually, bankofbooks.org usually has it on 20% off or something. So that's good because to me, it's actually, most of my books I just self-publish because I'm like, yeah, well, first of all, the ideas cross over all over the place. And the publisher looks at me and they say, fiction or nonfiction? And I say,
Yes.
yes. So I'm screwed from the beginning, it's like, but so those are mostly on Amazon. You can always find me on Amazon. I have a book about happiness, a romantic suspense novel there, and Dina is there. And then the human idea is kind of all over. And thehumanidea.com. I also have a YouTube called the Human Idea Sphere. I'm going through in little snippets, 3 or 4 minutes. I try to take a little bit of a snippet on, the concept in the book. So I'm just now on chapter 3. It's going to take me 500 years to get through the YouTube series, but what's time?
Do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I think that when you understand that you make your own choices, and as long as you don't harm anybody, it's so powerful. I live strong because I can and because I understand how it works. And I, like you, was very disappointed in the election. And I thought about it. I've worked on a campaign where I don't know if you're familiar with Lauren Underwood from Illinois. I worked on her 2018 campaign and we got her in. She was the youngest Black woman to ever be elected to Congress. And she's fantastic. She's been reelected this year. I just don't have the mindset to run for office because I just am an introvert and it's just too hard for me. But there are people who do. And so what I want is for people to understand the power of this concept and live their lives this way, and they can do amazing things in whatever field they choose with this. And it's the source of my resilience, I think. And I hope it becomes a, a kind of a little reference manual back there for other people to have that sense of resilience and power, even when things are really bad.
Well, we will
Yeah.
certainly do everything we can at One Voice Evolving to amplify your voice and your work. I
Oh,
think
thank you
it's
so much.
perfect for our season 2, and I appreciate your time today.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was a delight to chat with you. You had such good questions and just love the work you do. And I think I'm hoping that even you will look at this and say, maybe I can look at my work that I do and where you're affecting people in a very personal way. Um, then, maybe it will help make things, I don't know, clearer or, whatever, useful.
I immediately think your perception and your approach is very useful for having crucial conversations without defensiveness
Yes.
or
Yes.
attack, because it's
Right.
difficult when it's emotional.
Right. Right.
And so I am going to be
Yeah.
practicing.
Yeah, well, and I have to have a difficult conversation, and the minute I go in hot and start, it just devolves into something bad. So I have to go back and say, okay, learn this lesson again. Don't do that. Come back, approach it from a logical point of view. Understand where they're coming from. Understand the choices they want to make. Go there first. Then and then you can have a conversation. It's very helpful to me.
Wonderful.